Up next, what we'll be doing is interviewing project leads that have applied the Dialing Congress campaign framework to their own chapters and have some stories and reflections to share with us. So joining us tonight are the following leaders. We have Alan Anderson, who is the CCL Northfield, Minnesota leader. Alan worked as an executive for the Boy Scouts of America and retired after 34 years with the Scouts. He now dedicates his time to climate change education, speaking to numerous churches, schools, service clubs, and business groups. Also joining us is Dan Slick, who is CCL Madison, Wisconsin's leader. He's a longtime CCL leader, teacher, artist, swimmer, and climate activist. And then finally, we have Ben Boral, who is our CCL Austin West Central leader. And on top of being a CCL leader, he is a software engineer at RetailMeNot Incorporated, working on mobile and web applications.
We also have the wonderful Ham Richards, one of CCL's Austin Central leaders. Ham retired in 2006 as senior lecturer in computer science at the University of Texas. These days he volunteers technical support for CCL Austin, Common Ground for Texas, and Austin's Rowing Club. We also have the wonderful Ellen Van Velsor. Ellen Van Velsor was formerly a senior fellow in research and innovation at another CCL group, the Center for Creative Leadership headquarters in Greensboro, North Carolina, and now is the CCL Greensboro, North Carolina group leader, along with the North Carolina State Coordinator.
So thank you all for joining me tonight, and thank you for your willingness and sharing your personal experiences with the Dialing Congress campaign. Although these three leaders have implemented systems similar to the Dialing Congress campaign framework, they all have their own individual ways of leading this project, and we're really looking forward to hearing that you guys have to say tonight. I want to start with Alan. You're one of the 4 originators of the Dialing Congress campaign in Northfield, Minnesota, and we'd love to hear the basics of how your system works. Do you mind sharing with us the backstory for your project?
Be happy to do that. So we were at a regional CCL conference, 4 of us driving home from that event, talking about, with some frustration, that our fairly new Republican congressman wouldn't meet with CCL, and his staff said they were never hearing about it from any of the constituents. And so as we drove home, we said, well, how can we change that? How can we make sure that they really start hearing about climate? And we brainstormed a number of different things, but what we kind of set on would be that, wouldn't it be great if one or two calls every single day came into the office with some simple message about, I saw X in the news about climate and I'm concerned about it. I want you to do something. For example, at that time, joining the climate caucus in the House. And so we kind of, as we drove home, we hatched the idea, started talking about the details, and then in short order, we had an opportunity. We were tabling at a community event, and we just put out a sign-up sheet that said, if you'd really like to do something to help with climate change, would you be willing to commit to 1 phone call a month if we tell you what to say and who to call? And in very short order, between that and 1 or 2 other tablings, we had 100 people. And out of the 100, maybe only 20 of them were CCLers. And so among other things, we also recruited more CCLers in the process. But we divided the 100 into 4 groups of 25. And then each week we would put together a little letter, which was kind of a boilerplate from month to month, with it's your week to call. When you call, here's the name, here's the phone number. Here are 3 different articles in the news about climate, and we would have a 1 sentence and then a link to the article. And then 3 different things you could thank the congressman for. Sometime we had to look pretty hard for those, but we would find them. And then one or two different asks. So people could choose, what they wanted to say to give the calls on the other end, on the receiving end, more variety. And I would say that we had about a 70% faithfulness call rate out of the 70. So in a typical month, out of the 100 potential calls, they'd probably successfully make 70 of them. One of the other benefits of it was that the members got an education, because each week, or at least once a month when it was your turn to call during a week, there would be 3 new articles of different types of climate in the news. And so we educated those 100 folks more thoroughly about climate change. And as I mentioned, a number of them also decided to join. We used Google Docs and a spreadsheet to track calls. So when somebody called at the end of our weekly instruction sheet, we simply said, after you've made your call, click reply to this email and just say, made my call. And from there, we would pick up and record who made their calls. And so we could track how many calls every week and every month and through the year. And of course, over the course of 2018, hundreds of calls were made. So it was a lot of fun. In the case of our Republican congressman, he initially was, I would say, not so much a denier as somebody who just simply knew nothing at all about it. And initially he wouldn't meet with CCL because no one was calling him about climate. After about a year, he called us for a meeting and asked to meet with our liaison. And I would say that over his 2 years in office, he became very well educated about CCL, about climate change, about the bipartisan House caucus. And he started including in the emails that he would send out to constituents questions about climate change, which he had never done before.
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the backstory. I was at a June conference up in DC, and Alan did a little presentation about this process. And at the time, he was calling it the Grand Canyon process because little drips of water created the Grand Canyon. So that was a nice story and kind of memorable. And so I brought the idea back. I was not the first person, or we in North Carolina were not the first to do this. It was already tested kind of successfully. And so I brought the idea back to my chapter, and it was in the early fall, I think, when I first talked to them about it. And we decided to kind of wait until after our elections were over and the first of the year. So we went ahead and kicked it off then. And we kicked it off. We have 2 congressional districts in our chapter. So we actually kicked off 2 projects, one for each member of Congress. And so the person who had talked about it in DC sent me the materials, the basic materials. There's basically only 3 pieces that he sent me. One is a spreadsheet on which to keep track of the calls. One is a welcome letter that you send to people when they agree to volunteer. And then one is something called the calling plan, that is the reminder that they get on the Sunday before the week that they're being asked to call. And in the calling plan, it gives them a little customizable script in addition to explaining the process. And it allows them, if they're not sure exactly what to say, it allows them to use this customizable script to do the call in a CCL way, because we have not limited it just to CCL members. We've actually gotten some volunteers who are friends and family, neighbors, who may not know how we do things when we interact with Congress.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your backstory and the specifics of how you calls. It's clear you made some great progress, and we really appreciate that. I'd actually like to turn to Ben now, because I think Dan has a similar system to Alan, and Ben, I think yours, when it comes to your system of tracking and getting those calls generated, is a little bit different. So I'd love to hear your backstory and how you track your calls and you remind, and what platform you use.
Ham Richards here in town is also on the call, and he and I work together on our little operation in Austin. And he is a lot of the force behind getting all of our call notifications out to callers each month, and reporting, or not reporting, but collecting the call reports into a spreadsheet and keeping track of our numbers. We currently use a similar setup to Alan and Dan in Minnesota and Wisconsin, composed of Google Docs, Google form that people can sign up on. But we've also put together a website that kind of gives the pitch so that we can direct people there, and then they can click a link from that website to sign up on a Google form. And Ham has written some scripts that make our process of sending call reminders semi-automated. There's still a little bit of manual work, but we do similar sending an email to our callers with the same please respond to this email when you have called. We do generate a website for each call-in guide, and we make a new call-in guide every month that also includes current events, specifically things that have direct impact to the local area, because our members of Congress care the most about the local area. And the one thing that I will point out is that tracking all of this, well, sending call reminders, tracking who called, putting together a nicely presented list of topics that people can use to talk about. There's a lot of legwork, and so it's a big commitment going in, and but we've been doing it for several months, and we haven't got the longer term feedback or relationship with our local members of Congress. Like in Minnesota, we have not been, haven't had regular conversations because of it, but we have noticed good signs. We're doing this for several congressional districts in the Central Texas area. One member of Congress, his staff member, commented to our liaison who stops by the local office once a month that she has observed a lot of calls about climate change and she's noticing it. And another nice event, which I would like to think is at least partially a result of the efforts, is that we, our chapter in Round Rock, a suburb north of Austin, Round Rock and Georgetown, was able to get an in-person meeting with their representative in the last few weeks when the Congress was, I guess, on recess and representatives were back in their districts.
One complication we have in Austin is that we have 6 congressional districts to deal with because of gerrymandering. Keeping track of all of those is probably about 6 times as hard as keeping track of one. I've been doing a lot of daily work. Ben has contributed a huge amount in terms of the website for the sign in, the forms, and the calling points. We have a separate web page every month for each of the 6 congressional districts with tailored talking points to give the callers some guidance as to what to say when they call. There's no way this can scale up. 6 is perhaps slightly past the limit. And fortunately, version 2 is on the way. Ben hasn't told you anything about it yet, but Ben, would you like to say something about version 2?
Well, okay, so yeah, I'm a software guy, and so I'm always like trying to see what can I automate, and so I'm working on with another developer here in town, trying to basically write some software that will automatically send call notifications, will log the calls when they're made, will add people onto the list, people who want to be making calls onto the list, and provide a really easy way to be adding talking points or these current events that are relevant to the district and editing those and kind of changing the call-in guides as current events change. And so software is hard to predict when you finish, and so I'm not going to make the mistake of stating when I think I'll be done, but we're made a lot of progress, and I hope to have something that other people around the country, if they decide that they want to do this project, that they can use to automate the administrative type work, the sending of emails, sending of reminders, and logging of calls, those kinds of tasks. Make it easier to run this project because it is a labor-intensive thing. It's very valuable, and I get great feedback just from my friends who are not CCL volunteers. They love telling me when they made their call. So I want to make it easy for other people to do it, and so we're getting there.
Awesome.
The vision is that once this thing is rolled out, the only thing that people in each district will have to do, or each state, will be to edit, revise, and maybe even generate talking points. All the rest of it will be automated and will require no intervention at the chapter or district level.
Well, thank you so much, Ben, for giving your personal backstory and sharing your experiences. So I'd like to move on to Dan. I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your personal reminder and follow-up system.
People get their reminder the week they're supposed to call, but if they don't call, we send them a follow-up reminder. And the follow-up reminder is I don't know, maybe around 200 words total. But it basically asks them if they forgot to call, and if they forgot to call, and anytime it's good to call. I send it out one person at a time, because I want it to be, it's sort of designed to be a little bit more personal. And if you approach people in a more personal way, they tend to respond better, and about, and it raises the percentage, to the total percentage of calls we get. And it does, so it's pretty effective. But if people don't respond after 2 tries, I don't sweat it. I just move on. And I don't know exactly how, in terms of, in ours, I don't know if this is the same or different than Ben or Alan, but in ours, when people make their call, they just, there's a link in the reminder that they just press the link, they go to another Google form that just says, I called. And they press the button, and they report that they called, and then that goes onto its own spreadsheet, and then I know who called and who didn't call. So who to send a follow-up reminder to.
Great. And I love that you put your little personal pieces of art in your emails. I thought that was...
Oh yeah, I illustrate them, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, after doing this for like a year, do you have any recommendations for groups that might want to start this in their own chapter, or anything that you wish, or that you could, if you could change, that you would go back and do?
For me, ours is a statewide one, and it's directed at our senators. And that's kind of cumbersome. It's hard for me to do because I'm not terribly well connected to the other chapters in the state. And if it was, if there was a little bit more of a team effort, I mean, some group leaders have told me that they're not going to encourage it in their group because they have other priorities, but we have a lot of, we do okay, but I feel like we're stuck at a certain number, and I think we need to be at least twice as big as we are, given that it's a statewide thing. And one of the issues is, for me, in terms of what I would do different, is when people sign up, I would try to, since it's a statewide thing, one thing I don't have is I don't know who is where when they sign up, because our form doesn't ask that question. And if it asks what's your congressional district, or where's your location, in some general way, they don't have to tell me their address, but if they have their general location or congressional district, then when we're trying to coordinate with people who are going to be setting up, I know there's a couple districts that are going to be setting up this kind of a system for their congressperson, and it would be nice, easier to coordinate if I knew who in my list was going to be on their list. So there's a coordination problem in terms of growth. And I wish I had asked that question on the form, and I didn't.
Well,
So,
great. Thank you. That's great advice. Alan, how about you? I know it's been like 2 years, I think, now that you've been doing this system. Do you have any advice, recommendations for any other leaders who are interested in doing this?
I do think that it's got a lot of advantages. One of the things that I would say, though, is that ideally you have a minimum of 3 and 4 or 5 people who are really committed to each take a piece of the pie. If you had somebody who updated the monthly letter that's going out, another person that's in charge of tracking calls, a third person whose only function is the call reminder to the people who failed to make their call during their week. And we actually did that also, and it was interesting to see that the call reminder sparked probably 50% of the people who didn't call to then finally make the call. And then somebody who just tracks down new interesting climate stories in the news, captures the link to them and puts it on the website, so that when the monthly call creator is updating the letter, they can just pluck those from another Google Doc that we have, because it is time consuming. And it's just something that's there, happening every week or every month. And you need a team of people to keep everybody happy and keep it all going.
That's great advice. Thank you. So my last subject and topic I'd like to talk about, you all kind of started to touch on it a little bit. Basically, I'd love to hear about the major differences you've seen. You talked about how there were differences with some of your members of Congress and in the relationships that you have, but have you seen any differences in your chapter engagement or within your chapter after you've started to implement this system? And any of you or all of you are open to give your own opinion.
Well, I'll jump in. I would say that it helped strengthen our chapter. We did recruit some more folks who became regular attendees and interested in other things also. And then as I explained earlier, it did affect our congressman, at least in that he started paying attention to climate and acknowledged that he was learning about it, and told us that he was considering joining the bipartisan House Climate Solutions Caucus.
I think that this project is a really great way of recruiting, or at least bringing people into some kind of regular engagement with climate change. I think it's a big ask to ask someone who is busy with their job or their family or whatever's going on in their life to be a full-fledged CCL volunteer who, let's say, attends a monthly meeting or goes out and tables at an event, or does any of the activities that we do. But there are a lot of people who care a lot about climate change who just are not able to give that commitment. And one phone call a month is something that just about everybody should be able to fit into their schedule. Yeah. And so I think that this is a great tool for recruiting future CCL volunteers, but it's also a great way just to activate people who agree with CCL, who appreciate the CCL respectful way, but aren't able to give it that full commitment that to be a volunteer. This is a great way to help them do something. So that's the way I think about this project in terms of bringing new people in.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really, really awesome.
Well, our goal as a chapter is to have just as many calls per day as we can get. Because as I said, quantity is really the issue, quantity of calls. And so right now we're having 2 calls a day. We would love to have 20 calls a day or 30 calls a day. There is no upper limit to the number of calls that you can have or that you can shoot for. Now, when I do my welcome call to any brand new member, one of the things I do after I listen to, what they're interested in is I say something like a very easy way to get engaged with our chapter is to volunteer to be part of what we call the Dialing for Congress campaign, because it only takes, a few minutes a week, twice a month, and you get a connection with your member of Congress office, and you learn a little bit about what we're doing. And usually, my experience so far is that our new member pool is one of the best ways to continue to recruit people to the project, because it's an easy thing to say yes to.
I was going to say, in terms of response from our senators, I don't, our liaisons haven't told me that there's been any particular change. But in terms of chapter engagement, well, because it's a statewide thing, I don't see other chapters happening, but we just had our state conference, and it was the best attended state conference we've had in a few years we've had them. And the question was asked, how many people are participating in this project among the people who were at the conference, and like 40 or 50 hands went up. And so that was like, oh, that was interesting. It means that a lot of the people who were making the phone calls are now coming to the came to the state conference. And that's and it's like, people knew who I was, who I didn't know who they were yet. So that was, to me, I think that's a positive sign in terms of chapter engagement.
One of the misconceptions I think people have when they start to drop out over time, I had someone say to me just the other day that she was dropping out because every time she calls, she gets the same staffer, and that staffer, always has kind of the same response. So she doesn't feel like she's getting anywhere with that staffer. And so I think that's the response of a person who's very passionate about having an impact, and which is great. But we have to remind people in the beginning and over time that this is not about talking to a particular staffer until you change their mind. It is about quantity. And, we say that in the calling plan, that we're trying to get as many calls as possible.
Our goal was to have an absolute minimum of 1 a day. And we actually, when we had our 25 callers for a week, we actually had them divided into days. So these call on Monday, and these on Tuesday, and these on Wednesday, ideally. So if they made their calls, and our goal was that we've heard congressional aides say that whether it's a phone call or a letter, it just becomes a check mark on the tally sheet, which gets reported to the congressperson. And so our goal was that every single day, the tally sheet would have at least one, if not more, calls on climate, so that when it's reported to the member of Congress, every day somebody's calling about climate. So that was our goal. At a minimum of 1 a day, that would be 5 a week on average, et cetera.
I would just say that it's fine to start with a few people, because when they find out about this thing, they get excited. Mm-hmm. And it's not hard when you start talking to people to get them to sign up. And so the amount of work is directly related to the number of people you have signed up. So get some practice with just a few people.
Yeah. And
then more will sign up, and you'll get better at it. And
I have one little piece of advice, and that is that if anybody tries to follow the instructions in the Dialing Congress campaign instructions, and if they get discouraged, just have them wait until version 2 of Project Grand Canyon comes out, and their worries will be alleviated.
I wanted to say that everybody needs encouragement, and even people who we think are on our side, when they're they're more or less, some of them are more, some are less reluctant to speak to people across the aisle, initiate conversations on the subject within the body. It's always, they have a million things to deal with. It's easy to avoid the subject, especially if you're kind of don't think it'll go anywhere. So the encouragement really kind of helps spur them on to initiate and keep initiating. It's not easy to keep initiating, and they need that moral support.
Gotcha.
Excellent point, Dan. So here's one for you, Dan. When you're actually calling, is part of the script to identify yourself as a CCL volunteer, or do you leave that out?
Oh,
We leave it out.
we leave it out too.
And we also leave it out.
You know, another thing we leave out is the and people should tell me what they think about this, but we leave out the appreciation, and the reason why is because the appreciation can oftentimes lead them to check off that you're calling about what you're appreciating them for instead of calling about climate change.
And
we did the same thing. We started having gratitude, and we took it out.
And we started with a thank you. And I think when you're visiting an office and you're talking face to face, starting with appreciation is good. But in a phone call, what we found was that they would record the appreciation, and callers would get letters back thanking them for appreciating them about whatever it was, and no mention of climate change. So we started putting the appreciation at the end, and that seemed to solve that problem in our case. I did want to mention one other thing. If you've got a member of Congress who really does get it, and they're supportive of climate change action, one of the things that we did with our new congressperson is we really, as soon as she was elected, we did a full court press on educating her in detail about carbon fee and dividend, to the point where she could quote us chapter and verse. And now as a new Congress person, she's one of the co-sponsors of the Energy Innovation Act. So I think that even if you've got somebody who's really a true believer, then going on to educate them about the difference between a carbon fee and dividend and cap and trade, and why you can make such a tremendous case, including to conservative colleagues,
Yes.
about why we should be doing the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act.
Well, I love that you all have very similar yet different systems going on and with your own personal touches, and they're all doing really great. So once again, thank you all for sharing your backstories and how this process has gone for you.